Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering Series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday, we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work, and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
Given the speed at which technology is forcing change, it is now impossible to be an efficient designer without having a learning mindset. Individuals with a learning mindset are more likely to be creative, humble, and open minded, all necessary ingredients for creativity and innovation. They believe that creativity is not a genetically present trait. It is something that can be cultivated through practice and collaboration with other people. This belief drives them to constantly experiment with new approaches and ways of thinking rather than getting fixated on the right answer. And that's why in this episode, we interact with Deepak Menon, partner director at Microsoft. He has led product experience across all products at Microsoft India, research and development. It includes all of Office on Android, Visio, Visual Studio, Bing.com, and many more with over 2 decades of professional experience. And that's why on our journey of discovering designeering, we talked to him about the windows of design. Hello, Deepak, and welcome to Avantika Designeering podcast series. It's an honor and pleasure to host you on our show today.
Absolutely. The pleasure is simply reciprocated over here.
So, Deepak, let's start with an icebreaker question. You and your team have helped define the inquiry around what is productivity for billions of mobile only users, which has led to a few product innovations as well. The question that I have is how do you manage to stay productive? What's your mantra to get great performance at work?
First of all, Rohit, thanks for inviting me. I think staying productive means different things to different folks. It's based on passion, interests, ambitions. Specifically for me, to be productive in my professional career, it has meant that I have to be centered. Over time, I felt it has meant working hard, working smart, but most of all, working together better with the folks that I closely work with. Those are the vectors that have enabled me to understand what has actually worked for me. These are also the vectors that enable me to build the tools that I feel helps individuals and organizations achieve more. And I believe that's a great performance or my mantra for great performance at work.
Wow, interesting and well said. The other thing that I want to know is you started your journey with Bachelor of Architecture, then to design, and now to leader at one of the biggest technology companies in the world. Can you take us through your journey from education to here? Did you plan all of this seamlessly? Was it accidental? How did it all happen?
I would like to say that I'm actually incredibly grateful. I've been lucky to have opportunities that I believe that few would have probably had. But let me start. I mean, ever since I was a small boy, I've always wanted to be an architect, primarily because my mother's brother was an architect, and I always used to see him, appreciate good to great design. And I think that interest continued, and I did my bachelor's in architecture. I was enamored by it, how it could influence our users, and then went on to do a master's in architecture in the US. During that time, this was late 90s. During that time, I'm not sure how many people actually even remember this, but cathode ray monitors were at the center of every office space design. They made spaces so impersonal. They were a barrier between two folks even sitting across a table. And so I actually did a master's in fine arts with a specialization in design. And the thesis there was a cloud based operating system, which allowed users to go to any desk and sit and have conversations and still be productive. And this was primarily driven from how office space would change, and that's how I landed at Microsoft. And I had incredible opportunities to work on key areas within Microsoft. So one of the key highlights during my first stint, incidentally, I've had three stints at Microsoft. This will be my third stint. My first stint, one of the key highlights was to work on Microsoft Office on the desktop. This was the early 2000s, uh, and Office was defined by toolbars and menus. And one of my first jobs was to redefine the commanding model, and we went on to define the ribbon interface, a huge departure from what it was before. Um, it won a lot of accolades. I would like to say that a lot of Microsoft desktop products are still based on that. You've seen it in Autodesk as well. In 2005, when Google opened its office in Seattle, I joined the office there at Google to be the first designer in Seattle. I worked on Google Talk when on the desktop there was significant number of messaging products like MSN Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, and therein I first understood what it meant actually being you know working well together. We rode off the velocity that Gmail had, and within a span of a year and a half, we were amongst the highest DAO or daily active users on Google Talk. But I think what was significant during my period at Google was it brought me back to India to work on Google Maps. At that point in 2006, there was little to no economic incentive to work on maps outside of the US and Western Europe. So geographies like India, most of emerging markets did not have any maps, as you see now. So what we did at that point in time was take satellite imagery and provided user-generated tools to trace points of interest, roads, and all mapping objects that would allow maps and geographies outside of the US and Western Europe to be traced or built, if you will. And by happenstance and tragic circumstances, in 2007, there was a huge tsunami. I'm not sure if people remember. And one of the key things that when any disaster strikes is rescue supplies or provision of rescue supplies. This happened in Malaysia, parts of India as well, and Thailand. And overnight, those regions got mapped. Uh, and that was so significant, just provided the ability for rescue supplies to be reached within 48 hours to most of those regions. That has now become the basis of Google Maps. And I think that has been a defining moment for me specifically because behaviors and products now built in geographies like ours go on to define, I mean, products and experiences for people all over the world. So, I mean, if you look at most of maps nowadays, it's built by tools that automatically draw or trace your movements on your phones. In 2008, I rejoined Microsoft to start building the design team here in India in the development center. It was an exciting time. I got about the team, a small team built. We had a bunch of infrastructure built as well. I left Microsoft in 2010 when e-commerce was at its what you call infancy, if you will. I joined Myntra as the chief product officer, and it was still a B2B company which sold customized products to businesses, t-shirts and mugs and the sort. Within a few months, we raised a significant amount of funding and we pivoted to be a fashion e-commerce company. And that time taught me a lot about actually being very, very, very close to users. I remember growing the number of orders from zero to over 10,000 orders a day. It was an incredible ride. It taught me a lot about fundraising, a lot about what entrepreneurial journeys are about. And it was some of my best lessons and my best friendships ever made as well. Around that point, Microsoft hired me back to re-lead the studio, and looks like third time is a charm. It's been 8 years here, and I would like to say that I've probably got amongst the best jobs in the world. I can see across a range of different technology areas, right from operating systems to browsers to consumer products to storage. You name it, I probably have a bird's eye view of what's happening. And I like to say that I'm incredibly grateful for all the opportunities and the journey I've had so far. So yeah, that's how I have come to be what I am right now.
Well, that's really interesting, and I think what's exciting is, three times at Microsoft, and how this entire thing has been. In fact, I have two questions from your journey. My first question, from your journeys, how did all of these years work out? Did you have to learn, unlearn, relearn things in the process, and if yes, what were those?
I think to be relevant, I've had to learn and unlearn, I think, multiple times, and then relearn probably exactly the same thing over and over again. Over time, I would like to say that I have changed my mindset, the agility. Tooling is, I think, one of the most on the ground things. I mean, if you look at when I started, there were things like Macromedia Director to now what's Protopie. Uh, Things have changed quite a bit in the way that people work. I like to take an example that's very close to heart. If I take productivity, when I started my career, I worked on Office. I worked on Office on the desktop. The way information workers work and what productivity means for them has changed. If I had to look back 20 years, it meant being focused, being at the desktop and creating something from scratch. And if I, look at what we are designing right now, which is Office and mobile, it's extremely tailored towards getting a job done in 10 to 15 seconds. So the dichotomy of spending focused time to triaging and being able to design that has meant for me to unlearn what I was used to and relearn and learn what needs to be done for our end users and satisfy them and their user needs. So, with the space of change and growth, what I've learned is hubris no longer works. One has to come into this with a learning mindset. So that's what I would like to say that I've come away with over these few years.
Interesting. And the second question that I had from your journey is that while researching about you and your profile, we see that you've been mentoring entrepreneurs for a long time. The question that I have is, why didn't you take the entrepreneurial plunge? And also, how does mentoring add value to your journey?
Interesting question. So I like to pose as this: I've probably got where else in this world one can see the vast breadth of technology affecting users' lives. I'm lucky to say that Microsoft gives me that opportunity, leading the studio here. While at the same time, I invest and mentor entrepreneurs that help me stay relevant. I learn what is relevant because entrepreneurs have to be dreamers, but they also have to be very, very, very close to our users to understand what are the gaps between what the user needs are and what the current environment actually provides and what can be built. Entrepreneurials or entrepreneurs, they tread the fine line of usefulness, feasibility, and desirability. They have to tread that journey to kind of provide value to the end consumers and users. And being in this dual, what do you call, how do I put it? I'm not getting the word for it, but and you may have to edit this piece out. um, it allows me to live the life of being at the cutting edge of technology across various spheres, as well as understanding what end consumers across various different domains actually need. So that's the value I believe. Mentoring and just working with entrepreneurs provides me.
Hey, did you know? Each year, Microsoft Research sponsors a semester long class at leading design schools. Students are asked to form interdisciplinary teams of 2 or 4 students to design a user experience prototype that solves a real world problem. It is called Design Expo, which began as a partnership between Microsoft and Apple to integrate technology into curriculum of design schools worldwide. The goal is to build a long-term relationship with design schools and build community across schools. The other question that I have is, you moved out of Microsoft, you joined Google, you came in second time, then you moved out to work with Mintra and Jabong, and then you came back for the third time. The question that I have is usually individuals do not get back to those organizations again. If they do it for 2 times. You've gone through that cycle 3 times. How's that entire thing been different for you? 3 times coming back to Microsoft. Each time, did you see a new Microsoft that you were working with?
So I would like to say yes. If I had to kind of say the three eras of Microsoft were completely different. I think the first time around, it was a very desktop dominant Microsoft. And that's why I worked on Office on the desktop. It provided me the opportunity to work on desktop when desktop was at its fore, if you will, early 2000s. During the second tenure at Microsoft, it was about building a team from scratch, ensuring that in an organization wherein design was not yet in India specifically mature, trying to kind of build that and galvanize the organization to understand the need for a different discipline to exist because it makes everybody better was a huge learning. The third time around is primarily about looking at both people, product, and or actually all three. It's about looking at people, product, and process, and how all three of them uh, can be uniquely, accumulated together to kind of provide value for end users as well as organizations to move forward. I would like to say during this specific journey of mine, which has been my longest journey at Microsoft, it has given both different challenges as well as opportunities across all three spheres. Building a vast and huge team across multiple disciplines, building various kind of products that kind of are at the forefront of what we are doing at Microsoft, and as well as processes that help product making get better. So I think each time, I think the challenges have been quite different, but very invigorating, if you will.
Interesting. And what's exciting to know is every time that you worked with Microsoft, there was a new experience and new challenge that you had to solve. And you also mentioned design, and my next question is around that every industry will have a different problem set, but a great designer should have a core philosophy they bring to the table to tackle an array of problems. The question that I have for you, Deepak, is what's your design philosophy?
That's a deep question that we can have a discussion, forever.
I'm sure we could have an entire podcast around that question.
Yeah. So, and to succinctly put it, I think being one with the user, that's so important. Understanding user motivations, their needs, wants, and desires is so central. I've seen hubris, I've seen intellectualization, And I've seen conflation of all of them. The motivation, needs, wants, and desires lead to many design solutions, most of them my own, to fall flat. Uh, I think being one with the user is so central, and being able to understand the nuances and differences between motivations, needs, wants, and desires help create solutions for our users that actually matter. And I think that's primarily the design philosophy. And we can go in depth into each one of them, the motivations, their needs, wants, and desires. But I believe the differences and nuances are so central because for each kind of product, I think the solution is to understand or tap different varieties of what user motivations could be.
Interesting. Um, and, you know, while you spoke about your philosophy of design and you touched upon the customer angle of it, I wanted to move the conversation towards your team as well. And if you talk about today's teams, they're different from teams of the past. They are far more diverse, dispersed, digital, and dynamic, with frequent changes in these membership. But while teams face new hurdles, their success still hinges on a core set of fundamental for group collaboration. The question that I have is, what are the secrets of great teamwork and how do you manage it at Microsoft other than the online tools that you've been using?
Yeah, online tailoring has become so important, hasn't it? Teams is a major one. I think it's allowed for us to continue working over the last 8 9 months. Um, but if I had to go back in terms of what's the philosophy of an organization that works well, or a team that works well, I think fundamentally for us to understand um, that we all see further by standing on the shoulders of giants, if you will. That means being better together and building great relationships is so core to the way that teams work. So, as a designer, and in today's world, it is so important that each one of us truly embrace that notion of working better together. Personally, I've found that caring and warmth, as well as building camaraderie, to have those bonds that allow teams to leverage each other more effectively, is so significant. This just allows people to work better together, as well as help people to leverage each other's strengths. And I think that's so fundamental in the way that teams work better together, not just designers. Designers ultimately have to work with researchers, developers, engineers, and product managers. So the ability to kind of work across disciplines with each other is so significant to make better products that matters.
I mean, there's no doubt about it, and we've seen multiple examples of great products out there. And one of them that I want to touch upon is Microsoft Studio Plus 91. And could you tell us more about it and the interesting products that the design studio at Microsoft works on?
Yeah, so we call our Studio 91. It's been a journey that's been over a decade in the making. I'm so proud of each and every designer, researcher, and leader that's currently here in our studio or has been an alumnus that has helped build this studio brick by brick. So, if I had to kind of articulate what we work across most of the products that Microsoft works on that you would know of. We work across Windows, Edge, Search, Office, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, Cortana, Bing, you name it, Outlook. Uh, we worked on almost all of them, or we work on almost all of them. So we're working on right now far too many product areas that I can just call out individually on, and I'm sure I missed out a ton. And it's not to say that they're not doing great work. All of them are. But suffice it to say that we're working on areas that count for billions of users across the world, across all aspects of their life. It's not a niche area. And that's why I'm so grateful to work with the people I'm working with on the products that we're working on. And we're working across uh, platforms, we're working across endpoints, we're working across apps. So it's been an exciting journey, and I think it's one that I'm so incredibly grateful to have. So yeah.
And now, moving from your journey and designing at Microsoft to actually capturing some of your thoughts about the world of design. And my first question there is, the design strategy is the term used to describe the nexus between corporate strategy and design thinking. In fact, it requires a methodology, a framework, a roadmap, and a way of thinking. The question that I have for you is, how can designers develop a strategic thinking mindset?
This is debatable, but let me kind of put something out there for us to all react to. So we are in an era where, in most instances, the experience is the product. It is the product. So for us, as designers and researchers, it is incredibly great. It's an incredibly great point of in time for us to be. So for us as designers and researchers, it is incredibly important to understand the tension that exists between the economics of how products can be designed, built, and sustained, as well as the problems that they actually help solve. It is an incredibly important ability for us to craft products that matter for our users. And I think that understanding that tension is incredibly important for us to develop that strategic thinking mindset because it helps us understand what are the gives and takes that one needs to have while developing the solutions that need to be built. So, yeah, I hope that helps.
Interesting. And my next question is that as a UX professional looking deeply into how our minds, emotions, needs, and behaviors coexist, it can help to translate human insights into design and strategies people genuinely need and want. My question is, how do we forge a new relationship between the product and people and make products and services more human?
So, I mean, as we build products, I think a key part of it all is that humanity is so diverse. And I think our products need to be inclusive of it all. And I think that's fundamentally where my belief is that behaviors that are born right here in places like India, China, Indonesia, Africa will become mainstream very quickly. Um, so inclusive design is, for those who want to make great products for the highest number of people. I think it enables and draws on the full range of human diversity. I think the belief that I have is that exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases. So we should seek out those exclusion and use them as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive design. And designing inclusively doesn't mean that you're making one thing for all people. You're designing a diversity of ways for everyone to participate in and experience a sense of belonging. And I think that's that way of design of designing inclusively is what will make our products and services human. And I think that's the basis of how at least I would like to kind of think of how do we design.
Hey, this is a quirky one. Did you know Microsoft has 35 cafeterias serving around 37,000 people each day? The best part, pizzas top the list of most popular meal at Microsoft. Apart from the food, Microsoft is one of the largest corporate collectors of artwork with 5,000 contemporary pieces, including painting, sculpture, works on paper, photographs, and the list goes on. Microsoft gathers art from local artists and upcoming artists and big names across the world. Oh, that's a very interesting thought process. In fact, you've been able to take this offline phenomena to even thinking about it online in terms of How do we make our products more inclusive? In fact, here is a question based on the same thing, that the increasing pace of technological change is obvious, and much sought after and expensive electronic gadgets are out of date within months of purchase and obsolete a few years later. In fact, it has caused shortening of the product life cycle combined with an increasing emphasis on innovation. The question that I have is, how are you keeping up pace with such change at your work and otherwise?
Yeah, the half life is just halving, if you will. So yeah, so I think it becomes easier over time. Yeah, at least for me, I have learned to develop a learning mindset, if you will. It's easier to become irrelevant if you have hubris and you believe that things are not going to change. So becoming irrelevant is what comes with technological change. So embracing that learning mindset and just exposing myself to as many new environments as possible is possibly the best way to keep up with the pace of change across multiple domains. And that's one of the key reasons, I think, being able to have this bird's eye view across different areas, as well as, learning from entrepreneurs, help me to kind of be close to what matters and being relevant. It kind of helps me in terms of what's changing on the technology side, but also how are user expectations changing across their various notions of wants, needs, and desires as well. So yeah.
Interesting. I love the emphasis on wants, need, a desire. I think basic fundamental principles, but these words are so loosely used in our daily conversations. And if people were to understand its impact, I think a lot of questions in the world of business, marketing, design gets addressed out there.
I like to say that a lot of us are very, very smart people. A lot of us. There is usually a tendency for most of us to intellectualize problems. They believe, or we believe, and I've been a victim to it as well. We believe that we know what's best by intellectualizing it, which means that it's very easy to move away from what the user needs, wants, and desires are, and kind of concoct it based on our own bias. And that's, I think, why it's so imperative to kind of make sure that the customer is at the center, or the user is at the center, and then understand what they need, want, and desire. Otherwise, it usually comes to it's what I want, I need, and I desire. And they are two separate things. The user is not us. And especially when you are doing for a vast set of users that's mainstream, the user is not, more often than not, us. I like to say that, as designers and researchers, we are probably very, very privileged. We are probably you know the set of people in the top percentile of the world, and therefore, if you're doing mainstream, you should actually look at the 100 minus X percentile of the world to understand what actually user needs, wants, and desires are.
Completely applicable, completely true. And if we were to understand these basics crystal clear, I think a lot of challenges in business and understanding human centered design and our customers gets addressed automatically. In fact, moving from there to changing another gear towards the world of technology. In fact, design thinking has been adopted widely by tech industry. Its approach can be applied by any organization that want to adopt a way to solve problems empathetically and collaboratively. The question that I have is, how can techies de- deepen their understanding of design to offer better products and services?
So, yeah, Rohit, you will think I'm sounding like a broken record, but I think exposing techies to users and providing them with the tools and processes and methods to be user and customer focused is so important. uh, I mean that the if techies understand that they have to solve for uh, the user needs, wants, and desires, then I think all solutions, while tech enabled, have to be, capital design, designed with a capital D. They have to be designed. Um, and I do believe in all of this. We have to do a great job to adapt as well. We have to ensure that we are articulating what we need to build, and pitch a story that's so important to galvanize and enroll colleagues in terms of what needs to be built as well. So I think a combination of all of that is extremely important. Provide the tools and methods to be customer and user focused, articulate as well as story tell the customer problems so that folks are galvanized to build products that they wouldn't build, in an ordinary run of the mill way, but they're galvanized to build because it actually solves something.
In fact, I'll get back to you on this blended approach in our last question in just about few minutes. Before I take this one more question, which is automation was not developed to substitute human reasoning and intuition, not to replace it. However, many tasks can often be effectively completed using robotic process automation. My question is, what human and social skills matter even more for designers these days in world of increasing automation?
What, Rohit? You're saying all of us are going to be irrelevant? uh, so, so I
I
think.
hope not.
Now, I think it's important for us to understand that ultimately we are again going to be better by being better together. So, for as designers, uh, we're all a network. We have to understand that we're all a network of conversations ultimately, and being able to increase that network of conversations, and especially with disciplines outside of design, is extremely important, because that just opens up eyes in terms of customer wants as well as what's possible to be built, as well as the economics of what needs to be built and what can be built as well. Um, I think understanding that is incredibly important. I mean, we talked a little bit about um, uh, strategic design thinking as well before, but I think understanding that this network of conversations with disciplines outside of design and formulating those connections is extremely important for us as UX professionals. It'll just enable us to be continue being relevant, as well as make sure that we are building products that actually are not just what do you call beautiful. They're actually how would I put it? They're not just desirable; they're actually useful and feasible as well at the same time. So yeah.
And that brings me to my last question, and also something that you touched upon earlier, which is the blended approach. In fact, at Avantika University, we coined a term called as designeering, which is the base ideology or philosophy that we operate on, the blended approach of the world of design and engineering. The question that I have for you is, where do you see design and technology blend in your field and your process? Do you think this is a relevant philosophy? Are we moving towards designeering rather than only design and engineering?
I mean, absolutely. I think the way I would say is great products are built with this concept in mind. We cannot think of, and throughout my entire hopefully throughout my entire conversation, the one thing I have hopefully conveyed is that we can only see further by standing on the shoulder of giants, which means being better together. So design and engineering has to work well, and it has to work together to actually build products that matter for our users as well as for our businesses. I mean, if you look at, we are probably at the center of one of the greatest events in history. Tragic. The pandemic has been horrendous on so many fronts. But we have seen digital transformation happen at a pace that's been completely unprecedented. If you look at areas around medical science as well as education, uh, we have probably seen the pace of change and digital transformation happen in 9 months that would have taken 9 years, or probably even more. It's been about solving clear and present user needs via completely technological means. So I would say that designing is so relevant from the present and continued future context.
Absolutely. We couldn't have ended this conversation on a better note than this. Thank you so much, Deepak, for joining us on Avantika Designeering podcast series. We look forward to staying connected with you, and I'm sure our listeners will have a lot of valuable insights from this conversation. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's been a complete pleasure, Rohit. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.